The title of our webinar is The History and Evolution of Thermage and the New Total Tip. I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Dr. Michael Kaminer. Dr. Kaminer is a board-certified dermatologist and a skin cancer and cosmetic surgeon in the Boston area. He is managing partner of Skincare Physicians, a 15-physician, 85-employee group that is a recognized world leader in dermatology and cosmetic surgery. Dr. Kaminer is one of the original developers of Thermage and performed much of the original scientific research. Dr. Kaminer is also an Alpha Omega Alpha Honor Medical Society graduate of the Tufts University School of Medicine. He is currently on the medical faculty of dermatology at Yale, Dartmouth, and Brown Medical Schools. Dr. Kaminer is also the team dermatologist for the Boston Celtics. I would now like to turn the presentation over to Dr. Kaminer. Dr. Kaminer, please go ahead. And
Elizabeth, thank you.
You should have control of the slides now.
Yes, I do. I can see it. Elizabeth, thank you so much for the introduction and those kind words. And I want to thank the folks at Thermage for inviting me to participate in this. And I particularly want to thank all of you who have taken time out of your busy day and days to spend an hour or so with us. Hopefully, we will do this in a way that makes it worth your while. And the goal is to make this informative, educational, and to have all of us at least leave with maybe a little bit of new information or something that's practical enough to bring back to our practices. So once again, thank you all for being here. And I will do my best at the end. If any of you have questions, feel free to do as Elizabeth said and type them in, and I'll do my best to get to everything at the end. So let's see if I can get these slides to advance. Okay. So the first thing I'd like to do is just disclose any conflicts, which I really don't think I have any longer. For a period of 8 years since when Thermage was started in 1999, which sort of gets to what's going on in this slide, I was the chairman of their scientific advisory board, which involved a lot of really great people who many of you know: Rox Anderson, Roy Geronimus, Jay Burns, Bob Weiss, and a few other people who I would love to give credit to, but there were so many I can't even remember all their names. So my conflict ended when my advisory board role with Thermage ended in 2007. I have done some research for them over the years, which has been funded research. We do have some devices in our practice, which we have purchased from Thermage, which is an important part of this. So at this point, I don't have any specific conflicts that I think we need to talk about. But if anybody of you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So the specifics now in terms of where we are, I think are nicely illustrated in this slide. Way back when, in 2002, when Thermage was first FDA approved, that was then called the TC3 machine. And that machine, if you all remember, caused a lot of pain. It worked modestly well, enough to, I think, support the FDA approval and its use in clinical practice. But I don't think it worked as well as anybody really would have liked. It certainly was not, and I don't think now is, a replacement for a surgical facelift. But it was a nice machine that did things that in 2002, more than a decade ago, we only dreamed of doing, which was to tighten skin without doing anything surgical. To Thermage's credit, that technology has evolved quite considerably. So it started with an idea from Ed Knowlton, basically when he was doing surgery on skin, open skin and facelifts. And basically what he noticed was that when you bovied the skin, used electrocautery, you could see that the area that you're applying the RF current to would tighten. And he said, wouldn't that be interesting? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to do the same thing to the dermis and maybe even the subdermis, but without having to make the incision first? So that was the scientific challenge. And again, that's where the TC3 came from. But the evolution to first the NXT platform and now the current CPT platform, try saying that fast, and then CPT with Total Tip, which we'll talk about towards the end, I think is a pretty remarkable evolution. And the two things that have happened with this evolution from platform to platform is, one, pain has essentially been eliminated, and we're going to talk about that. And two, results have improved significantly. And by results, I mean two things: the predictability of results, which in part was related to technology and in part is patient selection, which again we'll talk about, and then the quality of the results, the amount of improvement that people are getting. So let me advance this here. So this was the very first published paper that led to the FDA approval, and it was a multi-center study, but it was specifically for periorbital tissue tightening. And Fitz and Roy and David Goldberg and Susie Kilmer and Javier Ruiz Esparza worked with me on doing this study. It's a very interesting paper if any of you have not read it or if you get a chance, just to look at it quickly, because it's sort of where all this tissue tightening work started. And a lot of the studies that you see that other companies use to reference tissue tightening are based on the FDA approval, which came from this paper. Now, what's interesting is the paper essentially was a platform for showing that we could get skin tightening. But the challenge, and we wrestled with this a lot in our advisory board meetings, was how do you measure skin tightening? And to this day, the FDA has yet to approve a device for skin tightening. They approve devices for tissue and tightening and other things, but skin tightening specifically has not been approved. And the reason why is because they find it hard to measure. And so we chose the periorbital area because there was a way of measuring brow elevation, because we could do it scientifically with objective measurements. And we still do forehead treatments and periorbital treatments, but the bulk of the treatments are now done on the lower face. And the reason why this paper was not lower face was because it's really been shown to be, with now a decade's experience after this paper, impossible to measure tightening of the lower face in a validated algorithm. So after that paper, a bunch of things started to come out. A short while later, Jeff Sue, who was one of our fellows and is a very, very well-known and very skilled cosmetic surgeon in the Chicago area, Jeff was one of our fellows. And we published this paper in the Seminars Journal, with, and this is just a short summary, but basically what it said is, Thermage works okay, but it's not spectacular, right? It doesn't tighten 90 to 95% of our patients, which seems to be a standard that we currently try and meet. If I remember right, the data was that it tightens about 70%. So not that people get 70% tightening, but about 70% of people have success and 30 don't. And ultimately, there was this gap between success and failure. And it was a challenge to the community to try and figure out, okay, is it because we're picking the wrong patients, or is it because the technology needs to be improved, or is it a combination of both? So this all led to a bunch of people who were sort of wrestling with the same question to come together in 2006, I believe the meeting was, or 2005, you can see it on top. It was eventually published in 2007 in Derm Surgery. And basically what people were struggling with, here's a technology that sounds really interesting. It's got a lot of power, and if you look at some of the data and the science and the technology, it should really work well, but it's not. It's working okay, but could it be better? And there were two variables. It's not only could it work better, but can we do it in a way that doesn't hurt so much? I mean, we had some surgeons putting patients to sleep to get this procedure done and causing side effects that were sort of related to the anesthesia more than anything else. And so this consensus panel, and it was a very, very interesting meeting to be part of it. We held it down in Florida. We had a bunch of people who did the procedure. And the bottom line is there were 5,700 patients. And the consensus was that if we changed the paradigm, rather than doing a single pass, very, very high fluence, we would flip that on its head. And it came from work that Brian Zellickson did. It was very, very elegant electron microscopy work. And what he showed was that if you use relatively low fluence, but with multiple applications, you can impact collagen even more so than if you do a high fluence single pass technique. And he showed that quantitatively with electron microscopy. And then we applied that to the clinic and treated over 5,000 patients with this low fluence multiple pass technique. And the consensus was that we really were able to cut down pain a lot, and not only the quality of the results that we were getting were better, but the consistency, the amount of improvement that we were getting was more predictable from patient to patient. And this was really the game changer. This was the thing that allowed Thermage to be A, used by more physicians, B, more comfortable for the patients, and C, start to give results that were living up to some of the potential we originally thought. And this is some of what we saw in terms of the data before the guidelines in purple, after the guidelines in gray. And the next slide, I think, is the really important one. This is the one that the take-home message, which is the improved patient experience. 94% of patients are in this particular consensus in 2005 were satisfied with results and had minimal discomfort. And by minimal, we mean real minimal, not like, yes, we can sort of code it as minimal, but it hurts. It was real minimal discomfort. So 5% of people found it painful. And this 94% number I think is important, and it's one that I think we should try and carry through this discussion, because in our practice at skincare physicians, we use Thermage a lot. It is our sole go-to skin tightening device, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end about why that's the case. But we believe that our patient satisfaction rate is well above 94% and more in the 98%. And I know when I say that, some people raise their eyebrows. They even raise their eyebrows at 94%. And I don't know that we're doing anything special with our treatments, although we may be doing a couple of things, which we can talk about. But I think our patient selection and our patient education has improved. So I think this number is one that we can try and talk about. If I don't address it, please feel free to ask questions about it towards the end. So now we're evolving through the history of things. And so first we had the original platform that hurt, single pass, now the NXT platform, multiple passes, low fluence, not a lot of pain. Then the CPT platform comes out. And Jeff Dover, who's a superb dermatologist, unfortunately a close colleague of mine at Skincare Physicians, and Jeremy Green, who is a fellow of ours at the practice and now works with Fred Brandt down in Miami. We published a paper a couple of years ago with the CPT platform, and we did 20 consecutive patients, and we just asked them to rate their comfort with the CPT platform. And of them, 100% of the patients described the procedure as either a 1, which is warm, which is what you want, or mild to moderately hot. But nobody got to the point where it was a 3 or a 4, which would be intolerable or painful. So 20 consecutive patients with the CPT platform at a setting of about 2 to 2.5 on the machine, or lower if patients had pain. And we can get everybody, 100% of the patients, through the procedure with comfort, no need for drugs, no need for topical anesthetic, no need for a ride home, no need for pain medicines after. And that has carried through consistently in our practice. And so then there's some question about, okay, you talk all about how you can get your patients to be happy, but maybe that's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. Maybe you're just trying to convince them that what they're getting is a real result, but they're not really getting it, or at least some of them are. But there's some new results that come, and the reference is down at the bottom from a poster in 2013 in Aslam's. When you look at collagen production, and if you look at their control, which is their pre-treatment test levels, and look at percent collagen gene expression, you can see that both for type 1 collagen and type 3 collagen, at 30 days that expression goes up. And we do have some evidence that this goes on for up to 6 months post-treatment. And I know that there are some people who recommend a series of treatments. Some even do it monthly. We've tried to stay away from that in our practice, mostly because this gene expression, the increase in collagen expression, really is a process that we like to let itself play out over the course of 4 to 6 months to get the maximum amount of benefit from the treatment. And there's some evidence, which we're not going to present here, that if you do a second Thermage treatment before this gene expression has played itself out, you'll actually shut this process off. And depending on when you do it, you may not get even half of the collagen production benefit that you would get by letting it run through a little bit longer. So we tend to wait at least 6 months between treatments, and we usually wait about a year. So the other part of it, and we can talk quickly about this, but I think it's interesting to understand a little bit of RF. Now that we've gone through the history, we know that we're at a point where it doesn't hurt. We can talk a little bit about results and how we get consistency. But in addition to that, there's a lot of companies out there with devices that are marketed as skin tightening devices. And I think it's important to be able to talk scientifically about where's the meat and where's the beef and where there isn't and where it's smoke and mirrors. And so RF works on the principle of Ohm's law, which basically says that as electrons move through tissue, when they encounter resistance, that resistance is going to be changed into a form of heat production. And so this has Thermage, which is RF, has a polarity where the positive-negative charge changes nearly 7 million times in a second, which is 6.78 megahertz generator. And it's this heating, which a lot of the things that we use in cosmetic procedures produce heat. Lasers produce heat, RF produce heat, even ultrasound can produce some heat, microwave produces heat. But they all do it differently, and the question is, how is the heat production that we're producing going to turn into tissue tightening? And sort of, do the things that you're hearing from some of the other technologies ring true when you see how this works? So we have this RF technology, and basically what happens is the RF moves through tissue to a grounding pad, and Thermage has a monopolar meaning there's a deployment tip, which is what touches the skin, and there's a return pad. That's as opposed to bipolar. We may talk about that in a bit. But essentially what all RF does is it delivers heat. And when the collagen triple helix molecule encounters heat, it denatures. And a secondary phenomenon happens after that, which is you get this wound healing response. Now, people like to talk about collagen unwinding with heat and then rewinding afterwards. And there may be some element of that, but really you get this wound healing response. And the wound healing response at about 30 days starts to produce the collagen and new collagen that can produce tightening. And that's why I think most of our patients are now seeing results as soon as 30 days. And some even see it right off the table in terms of tightening. But it's really that 30-day mark where we're seeing this combination of immediate and biological tightening. So the histology is interesting, and this is work from early days by Javier Ruiz Esparza and his colleague Julio Barba. And basically what you can see 4 months after Thermage is you get this increased dermal density. And the dermal density, in addition to epidermal thickening, but it's the dermal density that was thought to be the home run, right? You get dermal thickening, collagen remodeling, so you get both what looks to be almost like a textural improvement, though we don't usually talk about textural improvement with Thermage, but this dermal thickening makes the skin look smoother, but it's also a tightening component because that's the what we call X and Y axis of skin tightening. And the XY axis of skin tightening is the dermal component. But the key here is sort of what happens after that. And I want to get to that in a minute. I think there's a slide to show it in a minute here. But what happens to get to that dermal thickening is this, we talked about with Ohm's law, is the delivery of RF. So you get this denaturing of collagen, which is function of temperature and time. Everybody also talks about how hot do you need to get it. There's a lot of devices, including invasive lasers that talk about measuring a temperature of over 40 degrees. And the thought is to get somewhere between 40 and 50 degrees centigrade. Above 45 starts to get a little bit dicey in terms of safety, so 40 to 45 seems to be the sweet spot. And what you want to do is drive it volumetrically. So on the left-hand cartoon at the bottom where you see Thermage CPT, and I'll see if I can use a pointer here. There's a yellow box, and that yellow box, which runs from about here up to here, is to indicate this volumetric bulk heating of the dermis. And that's what can lead to this new collagen production that's pandermal. We're going to get to the fibrous septae in a minute. And we can impact a large surface area. And when you compare that to something like ultrasound, and I'm not picking on ultrasound, it's just a different technology and a different way of doing it, you see these smaller yellow dots. And I know that the ultrasound technique has been modified to put these yellow, well, what we're calling yellow, but these ultrasound effect zones or injury zones at different levels. So here there's an example of just a single line of ultrasound injuries, which you can see is not volumetric but more targeted. And now this is being done at a more superficial as well as a deep level with ultrasound. And the results are quite nice. You can get nice results with ultrasound systems, but the technology is different. Pain is obviously different, but the concept is different in terms of volumetric with Thermage and focal with ultrasound. And it's just something to think about as you start to think about the technologies and how they might play out in your hands. So let's skip this slide. It's a little bit too busy for what we're talking about here. So this is the other part I wanted to get to, which is selective fibrous septa heating. This is a concept, and Brian Zellickson was instrumental in talking about this early on, which is we talk about X and Y dimension skin tightening, which is basically what you can see on the surface. But what we really wanted to do is get three-dimensional tightening, and two-dimensional tightening happened at the dermal level. But three-dimensional tightening, in theory, would happen if we could impact the fibrous septae, which are tethers that are holding the skin down. And if we could get those fibrous septae to contract, they might pull the skin tighter. And it turns out that this is likely to be true based on some histology and other work that's been done. But the reason why it works is because fibrous septae are the path of least resistance to the fat layer. They are the equivalent of dermal collagen. And fat is very resistant, and electrons just don't like to go through fat. So they go through the fibrous septae and therefore impact the collagen in the fibrous septae quite a bit. So there's this selective fibrous septa heating. The collagen does the same thing that it does in the dermis with unraveling and new collagen production. And this allows Thermage to treat in both horizontally in the volumetric way, but also in this third dimension, what we call the Z dimension. And this explains some of this immediate tightening, because you almost get, it's not quite a desiccation effect of the fiber septae, but you get a significant contractile event because of the high level of heating, because it's so focal in the fiber septae. And this is why you get both volumetric dermal heating and focal fiber septae heating. And of the technologies that are out there that are FDA approved that really work, volumetric RF heating with Thermage is the only one that gets down to the fiber septae. And at least in my opinion, is part of the reason why we see some significant improvement, maybe as compared to other technology. And here's a histology, and this came from Vic Ross, a study that Vic Ross did back in 2003. And you can see this is immediately after treatment of a human cadaver. And if you look at the normal dermis, and then you look here at the difference in color, this sort of amorphous pink collagen that's clearly been impacted, and you can see it's consistent at the fiber septae, all the way down through the fiber septae. Again here, all the way down through the fiber septae. You can see how that collagen has been denatured, more so than in the dermis, because there's such a small amount of collagen in the fiber septae, and all the electrons are flying right through there. And that amount of tightening is, I think, why we see such immediate results, and again, is a point of differentiation, which I think has some real clinical benefit. And again, when you talk about how things work, if you look at on the left, the patient's pictures on the bottom, but I want to point out here the illustration at the top. You know, we have these nice tight fiber septae. The skin is in a nice quote-unquote elevated position. And then when we, as we age, you can see here that the fiber septae start to sag, as opposed to here where they're nice and straight. And when you do Thermage, if you can tighten this sagging fiber septae that's here and get it to turn into a straighter, more tight collagen, then I think, hang on a second, I'm going to turn off my phone. If you can turn off, if you can turn off your phone. If you can get this collagen that in the center panel is sort of arced and get it to tighten in the Z dimension, which is the fiber septae, then you're in a situation where you can get a lot more improvement than just doing some dermal tightening. All right, so now what I want to do now is just sort of transition from where we were, which I think, based on that consensus panel, got things to a point where everybody thought, okay, we're pretty good. We get good results, 94% of patients. We can make this work in our practice. The number of people who are complaining that it didn't work is dropping. Now we have the CPT platform where it really doesn't hurt. We can get through patients through treatment in an hour. And then within the last 6 months, Thermage introduced what they're calling the Total Tip. And the Total Tip is a little bit different than the face tip. And in part, it's related to the tip design. So the Total Tip is on your left. It's that orange treatment head. And the quote-unquote older or original CPT frame tip is on the right. It's this blue treatment head. And if you look at the bottom, the actual part that comes in contact with the skin, you'll see here that the non-total tip, the original treatment tip, almost looks like it has a grid pattern on the bottom. So this little area right in the center of the bottom of the tip is gridded, whereas if you look at the Total Tip, it's solid. And what that change did, so they're solid, so I'm going to erase that one so you can see a little bit better. What that change did is we now have this solid center to the tip. And the tip on the right, the original Thermage CPT tip, think of it almost like fractional. It's like fractional Thermage. There were little spacing areas, and it was designed to be able to deliver as much heat as we could to our patients, but in a way where there was a little bit of a gap so that we didn't overheat the dermis. But the Total Tip seems to have solved that problem. So the fractional component was taken out, and because of that, and this is through some technology enhancements that were done through the Thermage scientific team, which is a brilliant team of engineers, we're now able to deliver 2 times greater maximum bulk heating volume. And there's an infrared camera on the bottom. Those 2 panels are designed to show that this one here on the left, which is the Total Tip, if you look in the center of the orange part, it gets a darker orange. It's almost like a brownish orange. And it's a larger field effect. So the orange is bigger and the center of the orange is darker as compared to over here, which is the original CPT tip, where there's still nice orange in the middle here, but it doesn't get to that same dark color, and darker is more heat, and it's a little bit smaller. So the left-hand total tip, more heat in a larger area and higher temperatures, which is one of the things that we know based on the principles, the biology of RF, gives superior results. And so this can be used, the total tip can be used anywhere. The same exact tip can be used on the face, on the body, on the extremities. You get immediate off-the-table results, which, at least in my opinion, come from some of that Z dimension tightening. And I think we got immediate off-the-table results for some patients as well with the original tip, but we get it a little bit more here. I think the patient satisfaction is at least as good as that paper that Jeremy Green, Jeff Dover, and I published. I don't know if it's necessarily better, but it's certainly significantly improved as compared to before. And I think from a business standpoint, you just buy the new tip instead of the old tip, and you don't have to do anything else with your machine. In our practice, I was the first person in our practice treated with the total tip. I had the treatment done about 6 months ago, and had been treated with the original CPT tip about 2.5 years ago. And from a comfort standpoint, and I am a skeptic, I'm usually a real skeptic. I was a little concerned that with all the heating it was going to hurt more. And I'm a guy, so guys tend to be more sensitive than women. But I found it to be totally comfortable. And so the pain profile was the same. I'd rate it as a 1 or 2 on a 1 to 10 scale. And I do feel that the quality of the Thermage results that I got short term or immediately after were a little bit better than what I got with the original CPT tip. So the total tip, the results were a little better early on. At about a month, which is interesting when some of my patients started to notice that I had done something, I think the results were certainly better than the original CPT tip. If I had to quantify it, I'd say it was maybe as much as 25% better in terms of tightening and the quality of the tightening that I had gotten. So, and I'm happy to answer questions about that too, if anybody has questions about sort of the experience. So this is the protocol. You basically use the Thermage face protocol. We're going to talk some specifics in a second. You use the patient's feedback. I do personally think that this is critical. I tell patients there's no need to be a hero. You do not need to tough it out. You don't have to have a lot of pain to make this work. All you need to do is at the end of every 2-second pulse is feel that it's really warm, which should be comfortable, and occasionally maybe a little pinch, which usually happens on the middle portion of the neck. That's it. If you try and tough it out, you're not going to get any better results. The trick is to do 900 pulses and not try and shortchange it and do it 400 or 600, but to use all 900. And this is pretty much how we do it. We do a series of passes. So this is designed to be, so the left-hand panel, you do the typical, you put the total tip in the middle of the square, and you treat the entire grid on an area. We tended to go back and forth between cheeks. So what we would do is treat in the squares on, let's say, the right cheek. Then we do over the circles, which is this right-hand panel, as this on the second pass on that right side. And then I do what's called squares, which is the left, circles, which is the right, and then I would actually do a third one, which over here, which isn't listed, which is bars. And basically what we do is we center the tip on the bar. So there's a vertical bar here. You can either pick this vertical bar here or maybe a horizontal bar. Either way, but you center the tip over that and you march up and down. You go, you would do this one up here, then you would do this one here, and this one here. And basically what that does is it gives 3 passes. Squares on the left, over the circles, and there's blue in the middle one, and then the bars. So that's 3 passes, and then the rest of it we freehand. We really don't do anything in terms of vectoring. I know a lot of people talk about that. I'm not convinced that it works, mostly because we did some studies early on in the early 2000s with vectors, really trying to nail down the vector approach. And Javier Ruiz-Esparza was a big proponent of doing that research and trying to see if he can make it work. And it worked a little bit in the beginning, but not a lot. So what we do is we tend to focus mostly on the areas that need tightening. So if somebody's got mid-cheek laxity, we go over and over and over that cheek a lot, as opposed to vectors. If they have prominent jowls, we'll do that over and over and over. And the total tip has heat sensors in it, as well as some other interesting technology to prevent user error. So if it gets too hot, it'll turn off for you. And if a patient's getting too red, just stop. And that's how we do it. We just focus on the area of need as opposed to vectors. And the target is basically this pain level, excuse me, of 2, which is, hot, just starting to feel uncomfortable, but easily tolerable. Most of our patients are actually treated in the 1.5 to 2 range as opposed to this 2 and 2.5 range. But we usually start people at 2. If they're really comfortable, we'll go to 2.5. Rarely does anybody get treated at 3, very rarely. Now, every machine is a little different, so my 2.5 might be your 3. I think 3.5 is probably starting to get a little high. Most of our patients are treated between 1 and 2.5, and that seems to do the trick for just about everybody. So these are some of this is obviously a cartoon from the folks at Thermage in terms of the keys to success. What I'll focus on the last 3, you really need to take photographs of everybody because patients, when they're living with their results over a month or even 6 months, they have a hard time remembering. So having a photograph to refer back to, I have found very, very helpful. We are very careful about managing patient expectations. And if I even get a whiff when I'm doing a consult that somebody's expecting something that's like a facelift, and usually that means they come in, they pull their cheeks back, and they say, this is what I want. I usually spend a lot of time counseling them, and then, importantly for me, documenting, because I finally only remember part of that conversation, that I've told them that if they want facelift-like results, they may get lucky and get it, but the odds are they won't. But if they want tightening, that's probably what we can do for them. And I think that's a big part of why our patient satisfaction is high. And then patient selection is important. And we're going to show some before and afters, and I'll try and touch on that in a minute. And so before we show the before and afters, the ideal Thermage candidate is obviously we've talked about expectations. I talk a lot. Ken Arndt is one of my other colleagues, and for those of you who know Ken, he's a gentleman of a man and a brilliant dermatologist. And he has a concept that he's been calling prejuvenation, which I think is something that's starting to get catch on. And the AAD just even put it on one of their releases in terms of a concept that they think is even interesting. But basically, what you want is somebody, the ideal candidate is to treat somebody before they need it. And so I like to think of it as prejuvenating or pre-treating them. You don't want to treat a 20-year-old because that's probably unnecessary. But I sort of say to patients, the minute you start to feel like you're getting a little bit of laxity, that's probably time to do the treatment. Because I think we get preventive skin tightening in close to 100% of our patients. Obviously, from a science perspective, we would never say 100%, but it's close. So if we treated everybody at age, let's say 35, everybody, I think we would throw a pretty wide net over prevention. And the challenges come either A, proving to them that we've done something, which couldn't happen until they were, say, 65 and they realize they look younger than their friends, or treating somebody who's very far gone and saying, okay, we're going to try to make you better, which we all know is a challenge. And so the sweet spot is probably late 30s, early 40s, somebody with mild to moderate skin laxity. I honestly actually don't think crepey or wrinkled skin is a great idea. In fact, I don't like to see that. They can have it, but I try and counsel them that that's not going to go away. We do treat people up to age 60, which is this fourth one here, but I think the younger patients tend to do better. And again, those who are a little lax, maybe have a little bit of a loss of definition of their jawline, not too thin. Really, really thin patients, in my experience, don't get a lot of immediate benefit, although I do think they get the prolonged preventive benefit, and I try and counsel patients about that. And people who are too heavy, I don't think get as much benefit either, although I think they do better than super thin patients. So somebody sort of medium skin thickness, and part of the reason why I think that that's true is there's some evidence that Thermage will work better in Asians than in Caucasians, and it probably has something to do with dermal thickness, and that's data that we've since used to help design the technology. You can certainly use it post-surgery, post-weight loss for the body, and post-pregnancy for people who have a little bit of laxity for their lower abdomen. I think that the area to focus on here on some of these treatments is the jawline. So this is a patient who everybody would think would be a really great candidate. The problem is I think there's a little bit more jowl than I would like to see. I don't mind what the neck looks like here. I think that's something we could probably do nicely with. But there's jowl here. I'd love to treat somebody who has a little bit less of that, although I think this person would be a good candidate. A better candidate would be somebody who has a little bit less than that. So I would say this person is probably late 40s, early 50s. And if she had come into us maybe 5 or 6 years earlier, I think we could have prevented her from getting to this point. But I think she's a more typical candidate who we see. And I just like to spend a lot of time counseling these patients that they may not see quite as much as they think they're going to get. This is a patient of mine. This is not with the total tip, but this is one of the more original tips. You can see in this picture, she's red here, and I think she had some form of a chemical peel before this treatment and then went on to have Thermage afterwards. So that's why she's red in the picture, in the before picture. But afterwards, you can see there's a lot of improvement. And I've wrestled with this picture a lot because to me, this is as good a result as I've seen. And it's one of my patients. And she was thrilled. I've wondered whether the before picture looks like her head may be a little bit back, which would accentuate this part. And that if she tilted her head forward here, it might make that look better. But having seen this patient in person, the result on the right is pretty typical of, is pretty accurate of what she looks like. And the picture on the left is pretty typical of what she looked like before. So I think it's real, but I'm even critical of my own photos, and I would be understanding if somebody said, wow, that's like almost too good to be true. But I think we see this on occasion, but it's not all the time. We see it more now with the total tip. So I would say, I tell my patients they may get something like this as much as 20 to 25% of the time, but this is what I would consider to be the home run. This is a woman who I think is not quite a home run, another patient of mine. I think this photograph is photographically, technically accurate, and that it accurately does reflect what she looked like before and after. I think if you look, her jawline is clearly sharper, and her submental area is a little bit better, but most of what she got, I think, was on the jawline, and I think that that's pretty common. So I think this would be a slightly better than average result, and I sort of talk to patients and show them this picture and say, if you get this, I think we'll both be happy. This may be a little bit better than you get, but it should be something somewhere in this ballpark. And now these are going to be patients who are patients who are not patients of mine. Here, I think, is a relatively typical okay result. What you can see is that there's a little bit of laxity along this jawline, and in the post picture, it looks better. Her jowl is not gone, but it's a little bit tighter. The submental area here looks to be a little bit better, but those bands that you can see here, these are platysma bands here in the after picture, and those are never going to go away because you can see them in the before picture. And I try and counsel people. People come in all the time, surprisingly, and say, I was told to come to see you because I want to get rid of these bands. And we have to talk them off that ledge pretty significantly. So I think this is what I would consider an average okay result. Again, I think this is somebody who's doing this in more the prejuvenation concept. All right, this is literally only a day after treatment with the total tip. And I do think you get a little bit of enhancement of the jawline and a little bit of tightening. But it's going to be modest, and it's not going to be something that's dramatic for her. But if she does this, and I think the rule of thumb would be every 18 to 24 months, maybe 30 months, so every year and a half to 2.5 years, she will maintain, at least in my opinion, the result on the right for a long period of time. You can go out as long as 3 years, I think, before you start to lose the benefit. Here's a picture where you can just see a little bit of brow elevation. Brow pictures are always tough because you don't know if somebody's raising their brows or not. But if you look at her upper eyelids, and you look at the lid crease on the left versus the lid crease on the right, you can see her brows are lifted. Again, this is total tip a day after. You know, the question would be, is she raising her brows or not? She doesn't have any wrinkling of her forehead to indicate she's raising her brows, which sort of suggests this is a real result. And we do see this kind of thing with some regularity. And again, this is another patient 2 months after treatment. And what I think you can see is the jawline looks a little bit tighter, but it's not that everything's gone. And this is the kind of patient who I would counsel beforehand and say, look, I think this is a pretty typical result for her from before on the left panel to after on the right. It's not dramatically different, so I don't think we would all look at this and say, oh my God, it shows something so amazing that we have to, you know, counsel our patients are going to get dramatic results. But it's a little bit better, and I think in this person's case, she got a little bit of improvement, and we'll get a lot of prevention. And again, this prevention concept is one that I think maybe gets under discussed. And would be helpful in terms of counseling. All right, and this is another picture just showing some improvement from Vic Nararkar of the submental area. And again, sometimes it's hard to interpret results, but you know, her after picture, she looks great. And if the before picture, in particular, this area right here, is an accurate representation, then I think this is exactly the kind of thing that we see from our patients. And I do think, whether you think the photographs are accurate or not, this is the exact kind of patients. And this, I think, is a real improvement that we see on a regular basis. Let's get through that just in the interest of time. And again, just real quickly, you can see here a little submental laxity. And you can see how that's a little bit diminished here after the CPT tip. And it looks just like it's a little bit tighter. sometimes also, by the way, this is an area that I call the pillar, and sometimes this pillar area will improve as well following Thermage. And I think it's just because of a little bit of cheek tightening and elevation. And so I think the evolution, it's a busy slide. I'll let you guys all try and make sense of parts of it that you find interesting. But the evolution of Thermage, I think, has been interesting. Personally, it's been fascinating to see how it's changed from a drawing on a napkin in 1999 with a concept through at least 3 and now a 4th generation. The results have improved, I think, dramatically. Our understanding of how it works and who it works on has improved dramatically. We have 14 years of experience with treating patients, which is why I think that I feel comfortable telling patients that it's preventive as well, because we're now 14 years deep, and I've personally seen it on some of my patients. In fact, I've seen it on my own skin. And I think Thermage has tried hard to brand the technology as an industry leader and have tried to put the resources behind it with technology innovation. So I think they've done a nice job of it. There's a lot of competition. There are certainly other devices out there that work for skin tightening. But I think if you look at least in our practice and in our hands, if you look at patient comfort, ease of the procedure, also ability to delegate the procedure, reliability of results, predictability of results, safety of results, and last but not least, the quality of the results and our patient satisfaction. That's why, despite all the other things that are out there, at skincare physicians, we only do Thermage for skin tightening. And our patients are happy and our staff is happy, and I think that's why we keep doing it. So I think that takes care of what I wanted to say. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over. Hopefully you found it at least remotely interesting. And again, I want to thank everybody for taking the time to listen. And Elizabeth, thank you so much. And I will do my best to answer any questions anybody might have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Kaminer. That was a great presentation. So we have several questions that have come in. The first question is, how do you feel about medicating patients prior to treatment with an anti-inflammatory? Do you think the one dose would inhibit the inflammatory response and affect results?
Well, that's a really thoughtful and good question. I don't think it matters. I think it would be fine to do it because it's really only one dose. And so you could postulate, even if it's a long-lasting anti-inflammatory like Indocin SR, you're probably not going to get a full 24 hours of it. And so I think there's always going to be a subclinical inflammatory response that's there because of the heat deposition. And that inflammatory response is going to trigger the cascade for gene expression of type 1 and 3 collagen. So I would imagine that it's fine in terms of not impeding future results. I just wonder whether it's necessary because our patients really don't get a lot of swelling. And so, if the person who's asking the question feels comfortable doing it because it's helping, then I don't think it's an issue. But it might be interesting to try it and see how it works without it.
Great, thank you. The next question is, when using Thermage over fillers, have you noticed any change in longevity of the fillers?
Not at all. I haven't seen any kind of change in longevity. But there have been some very nice studies done with all sorts of fillers and doing Thermage specifically over it. And if I remember that right, I think Murad Alam has done some of that work. And the only place where anybody has ever really seen any potential, and I mean potential because we're not sure, interaction between Thermage and fillers is over silicone, liquid injectable silicone. But I think over the other stuff, the data is out there, and I believe it's even published data. So if somebody has a different experience, I'd be curious to hear about it, but I have not seen that.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is, do you use the total tip on the body the same way as on the face? So in terms of the passes and the grid paper, et cetera.
Yes, we do. And I received a question that came through. I'm not sure if it came through to everybody, but I got it here about when we do those passes, do we do it by rows? So meaning, do we do a row of squares, then that same row with the circles, then that same row with the bars, or do we do the whole side? What we do is we do the whole side squares, the whole side circles, and the whole side bars, as opposed to by row. And when we do the abdomen, we usually do the whole abdomen. So the whole abdomen squares, the whole abdomen circles, the whole abdomen bars.
Great, thank you. The next question is, if you have a patient that you're treating who's requested twilight sedation, could this be done? And then follow on, could you then do combination treatments with them? So for example, Thermage and then a Fraxel or Clear & Brilliant or et cetera.
So you can certainly do Thermage followed by any of the above. I usually like to ask patients to wait at least an hour between. So basically, you do the Thermage and then you wait an hour, and then the heat that's been sort of deposited with Thermage is gone, and you because Clear & Brilliant or Fraxel or any other of these fractional technologies are going to deliver heat. And what I like to do is get the dermis to fully cool down for an hour. So I think you can certainly do that. I would do it in that order: Thermage first, then the laser treatment after. This twilight sedation thing, I would just caution anybody about doing it. There are, from the early 2000s, legal cases that that thankfully did not involve me, but I was involved as an expert witness in. And I think you have to be careful with any kind of twilight sedation if you have a side effect of any type with these things, because the precedent is out there that you'd probably end up not in a good position. So I think because we talk so much about pain control, and even for the most squeamish and the most concerned, we can get them through it. I would be really concerned because you lose a lot of pain feedback with twilight sedation, and that's the variable that determines when somebody's going to get into trouble. So personally, I would advise against it because I think it's a little bit of a risky slope.
Great, thank you. The next question, what is the maximum number of passes you would do freehand?
As many as you can. There's no max. I would do 15, 20, 30 passes. And the key is, so let's say somebody has a little bit of a jowl and I want their jawline tightened. I might go over one jawline, one side, 4, 5, 6 times. Not pulse stacking, and I know that's a question that gets asked. I don't pulse stack. I'm just concerned that we'll override the feedback mechanism in the tip. So I would just do, just adjacent squares, and I might do 5, 6, 7 passes, and then usually somebody will start to get a little bit red. I'll go to the other cheek, do 5, 6, 7 passes. We know that it takes about 30 to 60 seconds for the heat to dissipate enough to go back and retreat an area with safety. So I might do 7 on one side, go to the other side, do 7, come back, do 7, and do somewhere north of 20 passes to try and get some tightening in an area that I'm trying to focus on.
Great, thank you. The next question, have you seen any adverse events such as atrophy on the face after a total tip treatment?
Have not seen that. The atrophy events tended to happen very early on, and they happened sort of early 2000s. There were a cluster of them that were associated with sedation or conscious anesthesia, which is why I'd be concerned about somebody doing that. They were also tended to be focused on the temple region. And so I think a bad combination is high fluence with somebody who's asleep on the temples. I would never do that. I have not seen any atrophy personally ever in 14 years of doing the treatment. And I think it's usually fluence related. So I think if you use pain as the guide, most patients are remarkable thermometers, and that's what I like to tell them. Everybody, just about everybody, will feel pain somewhere at 40 to 41 degrees centigrade. And the predictability from patient to patient is remarkable. And so if you treat to pain, and we know that most people as an independent thermometer will feel pain at 41, 42 degrees, then if you have pain and you just stop right there, you'll never get high enough to induce a temperature over 45 degrees, which is when you might get into trouble. And so I think low fluence prevents atrophy.
Okay, we'll take one more question, and it is, how do you consult patients who are interested in having a Thermage treatment yet have read conflicting online reviews?
Ooh, that's a really good question, and that is a big challenge because there's a lot of data. You go to RealSelf, Yelp, in two ways that can hurt. One is reviews that are pre-2005, when that consensus panel was convened. So you have this pre-2005 information that's still floating out there, that Thermage hurts and that it doesn't work. Then you have post-2005. You know, if you use really high fluence, it's going to hurt, but most people who are practicing this and doing it really, really well tend to use low fluence. So I think pain is not so much of an issue in these online reviews, but it's an absence of efficacy. And the way I like to handle that is a two-prong approach. I usually talk with patients about the fact that efficacy is in part related to the technology, but in big part related to patient selection. So if I pick the wrong patient and treat them and tell them they're going to get great results, so I don't educate them properly, they're going to be unhappy with me. I can guarantee that. And I think there are a lot of patients who are out there who have been treated who maybe shouldn't have been treated. And I usually explain to patients that those people are going to complain, and they rightly should complain, because they were treated with a device that didn't have much of a likelihood of treating them. And then the second part I talk about is the preventive component. So I say, look, there are some people who have very, very high expectations. We spend a lot of time counseling them. And some of those people even will go out and say, look, I'm unhappy. But we know that people get the preventive benefit. And so somebody who says, look, I came in to talk to you, but I've read all these conflicting reviews online. I'll sort of put it back in their lap and I'll say, look, what we would try and do is make sure you're the right candidate. And if they're not, then we just don't treat them. If they are, we try and explain to them why they are, try and show them some pictures of a great result, a medium result, and a just okay result. And then last, explain to them this concept of sort of a preventive maintenance so that they don't sag even further. And then if they buy into all that and they say, you know what, I understand, I'm okay with a mild result or a medium result, which are the most likely, and the prevention aspect, and I'm okay with that, then what we do is we document that very carefully. And the people who just can't get over that, we just choose not to treat. And I think there are some who don't, but most people are pretty comfortable with that explanation. I hope that answers it. Hey, Elizabeth, there are a couple of real quick questions that I can answer quickly. Do we treat smokers? Yes. We just tell them they might not get as much collagen production. And is it dangerous around the neck? No. You just have to use lower fluences on the neck so it doesn't hurt. But we treat the upper neck all the time. In fact, I think it's critical to good results. And we do not use any pre-meds. Those are some of the questions that I saw pop up. And hopefully that answers it for most people.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, there was one last question we saw. How do you achieve your great Thermage results, and would you mind sharing your treatment protocol again?
Yeah, so I think I want to be careful about the great results. I think we have great patient satisfaction, and they're slightly different, but I think they're importantly different. I break it down to patients that I think about a third of people get a modest result, somewhat mild. About a third of people get a really nice result, so that if I showed all of you pictures, you'd say, yep, I can see that, and it's definitely better. And slightly less than a third get an, oh my God, I don't know how you did that, but I want that result. So it's the people who get the mild results that I think we have to tell people that they're out there, and we say, look, it's as much as 20 to 30%. But those mild result people, if they do it every year to year and a half, they can convert themselves into medium result patients. And we didn't talk about the repeat treatments. But I do think people who are just getting a little bit of benefit, maybe their collagen isn't that great, maybe their anatomy isn't perfect, if you treat them every year for 2 or 3 years, they will eventually, in most cases, convert themselves into medium results. And then we can back them off to every 2 to 3 years as a prevention thing. And the way we get those results is we are slaves to pain, right? So if it really hurts and it's hot, we back off on the fluence. The maximum setting on our machine is 2.5. We usually use somewhere between 1 and 2. We do those 3 passes, squares, circles, bars on one side. Then we go to the other side, squares, circles, bars. And then we freehand any area that patients want to have us focus on. Usually it's the cheek. So we'll do one cheek, then the other cheek, maybe 5 passes, 5 passes. Then the jawline, 5 passes, 5 passes. Then maybe the submental and along the jawline, under the jawline, another 5 passes on both sides. And it's really helpful to just go back and forth. And we usually can see immediate tightening, and we follow the tightening. So we're slaves to pain, and we follow the tightening. We sort of look and see where patients are tightening during the treatment, and we go ahead and try and make that a place that we focus on. One question popped up that I looked at, which is, can you use the body tip on the NXT face? The answer is no. You can only use the total tip on a CPT machine, that's my understanding, but do not use a body tip on the face using an NXT machine. That'll get you in a lot of trouble.
Okay, great, Dr. Kaminer. Thank you for a wonderful presentation. It was great, lots of great information. We've received a lot of great feedback so far through the chat box as well. So I want to also thank everybody for your time this evening. We hope you found it valuable as we did. And we'll have another webinar next month, so stay tuned for that invitation. Thank you, everyone, and good night.